Welcome to this video on Kofax ReadSoft Online, invoice processing in the cloud. With ReadSoft Online, you will transform your manual or semi-manual invoice process into a streamlined automated process. In this video, I'll show you how to use Kofax ReadSoft Online to receive, extract, validate, code and approve invoices in preparation for payment in an ERP system. But before we dive deeper into its functionality, I would first like to introduce you to the overall solution. Kofax offers a large portfolio of solutions for the enterprise, mid-market, and the SMB segment. With our document intelligence, cognitive capture, and artificial intelligence, Kofax can locate, extract, and understand any information from any source. In this session, we will focus on cognitive capture, integration, and workflow. As a true SaaS solution, ReadSoft Online offers unmatched scalability and performance. This purposely built application comes pre-configured with document types for most common invoice types. The ERP-independent approach allows for interaction with virtually any third-party system or ERP system. Ready-made certified integrations to major ERP systems are also available, along with an open and fully documented API. ReadSoft Online is a global solution with support for over 40 regions, languages, and multiple currencies. And on top of all this sits the analytic dashboard that will provide you with reporting data and key performance indicators. So let's have a look at the process flow and invoice in ReadSoft Online. Step 1 is to receive the vendor invoice. This can be in form of a paper invoice that is scanned by an AP staff member or a PDF invoice attached to an email sent directly from the vendor. In automated step 2, 3, and 4, the invoice will move towards the validation step. First, the process will prepare the invoice for processing, this in form of inspecting the quality, and if the quality of the invoice is poor, basic image enhancement will be applied to clean up the image to better the extraction results. In automated step number 5, the validations are applied. Validations can vary from document type and language as local rules and regulations are taken into consideration. But typical validations such as, is the vendor matched against the vendor master? Is this a credit note or a debit invoice? Is this a duplicate invoice that has already been paid? Just to name a few. Based on the outcome of the validation in the automated step number 5, the invoice will receive a status and move forward in the process. Next, I'd like to focus on step number 6. This is where the accounts payable end users will interact with the process to validate, complement, or simply remove incorrect or unwanted data. A very powerful feature allows the accounts payable clerk to use machine learning to train ReadSoft Online on what to capture on vendor level, should it be necessary. This is the only visible step and part of the process where the accounts payable clerk and approvers interact with the solution. I will show this in the demonstration shortly. Finally, automated steps 7 and 8 will prepare the invoice for output, or basically ingestion to an ERP system. The invoice image is also saved to the optional storage function available with ReadSoft Online. I will now log in as an AP clerk, the typical end user of this solution. And what you can see that you're presented with an inbox-like start screen that will show you invoices pending some sort of user interaction. And you can see to the left there are folders and different queues of where invoices might end up. We're going to focus on the verify node, which will show me that there's 7 invoices currently waiting for user actions to be taken. You might have received 10 or 20 or 50 invoices today, but 7 of these invoices need your attention. This can be in form of vendor master validations, or the invoice is perhaps a duplicate, or the amount fields does not summarize, for example. So I'm going to open up the first invoice sample here to show you what this will look like. What you see in the middle here is the invoice image. Regardless of where it comes from, if it's a scanned paper invoice or a PDF file that was attached to an email, it will show and display in the same manner here, regardless of the document type. If it's a purchase order based invoice, an expense invoice, or a credit note, it will look and feel the same. You can zoom in and out using your mouse wheel, or you can use the image controls in the bottom here. In the top left corner, you see some buttons and icons that more or less explains themselves, where you can print, you can delete, you can reject, you can email the invoice to someone in your organization, or you can email it back to the supplier with a question. You can put it on hold and save your work and such. If we look to the right, you can see the header and footer fields along with some supplier information. These are the fields that are being extracted off the invoice. And what I show you here is just a subset of what is available. There's no limitation on a number of fields that can be extracted, has no impact on the performance or the license. But basically, your ERP system will dictate what fields needs to be extracted off the invoice to completely process and pay the invoice. So what you can see here is that I have the most common fields needed to extract from a purchase order based invoice, such as an invoice number, a date, a PO number, and the amount fields. You can also see the supplier name is highlighted towards the top of the screen. This indicates with this green circle or checkbox that this vendor or supplier was matched against the vendor master. In this case, we based that on a address lookup. So this remit to address was validated against the vendor master, and a validation was met and populated the name and the actual supplier number. Next, we'll move on towards the bottom of the invoice, but first stop at the very first question or validation error. As you can see indicated by this yellow triangle, there is a question on the invoice number itself. If I click on the invoice number, zoom in a little bit here, you can see that it's OCR extracted correctly. However, there is a validation question. In this case, ReadSoft Online is prompting the AP clerk saying that this is a duplicate. As we compared against historic data, this invoice has been paid in the past. So that's just to show you what a validation could look like. I'm going to overwrite this just to move on. So the way ReadSoft Online found this value is based on its location, but also based on a number of other criteria, such as anchor fields and titles and synonyms for it. So to find the invoice number field or any other field, we use a number of anchors. So for example, invoice NO or invoice number or INV NBR are qualifiers for this field. We also use exclusions saying that an account number is not the invoice number, a date is not the invoice number, and so forth, along with the probability of this particular field being most likely in the top right corner somewhere near a date. It will still search and look for it anywhere on the page or pages to find it. The same exact approach is taken on the invoice date. However, for this value, there's more knowledge or information to go by. That means we know what we're looking for. There are 12 months in a year, up to 31 days, and we know the current year, the past year, and future year and such. It also excludes certain other formats or values, such as a due date and ship date, for example. So it will not be confused, nor will it present the user well with several options that are unnecessary. A third type of data extraction is the purchase order number. In this case, this is known information. Since we already validated this invoice against the vendor master, we also then know what purchase order numbers are valid and active for that supplier using master data. So we know that this is a correct value. So if I would enter incorrectly a number 0 here at the end, you will see that this invoice now received a validation error flag for an AP clerk to address. This is not a valid purchase order number for this supplier. If we move down to the amount fields, you can see that we are extracting a net amount, a delivery cost, a tax amount, and a total amount. Whether you require those fields or not, they are likely captured here anyways, meaning we use these values for validations, which means we take the net amount plus the delivery cost plus the tax to equal the total. We do this to confirm that the extraction indeed is correct, but also to identify suppliers that are rounding their decimals. So to demonstrate this, for example, if I keyed in an incorrect tax charge of $1, this invoice will be out of balance. So this is the message the accounts payable clerk will receive. The total amount did not summarize. If we look at the line items on this purchase order based invoice, you can see that they are extracted in a table column fashion where we focus on the column headers. So the product ID is the same as part number, article number, and item number and such, quantity and QTY, so forth. So you can expect ReadSoft Online to extract the line items for you. That is a very powerful feature. Also, what we do here is that we perform validations against master data in form of a two-way or even a three-way match. So you can see here highlighted in yellow is what the supplier printed on the invoice. In the bottom here is what ReadSoft Online extracted using OCR. And if I click on this magnifier glass, I can bring up the actual purchase order data from the ERP system. And here do a two-way or three-way match, basically by comparing the part number, the quantity, and the unit. Should there be a mismatch or discrepancy, whichever row that was involved in that discrepancy will be highlighted in yellow. If GL account coding is required, you can see towards the bottom next to the line item extraction table, there's an accounting tab. If you click on the accounting tab, you have the ability by use of master data to code these lines or charges into separate general ledgers or several dimensions. So I'm going to just show you here what this will look like. This is master data residing somewhere in a third-party system. So I'm going to pick an account here and I'm going to code the first row to be 230,000, and I'm going to move on and see that I can assign a cost center, and I could assign a project, for example. You can use up to 50 different dimensions. So whatever is needed for your process to complete this transaction will be obviously reflected here. If I add a second row, you can see that we have 13,500 left to code on this invoice. So I'll just move on and continue this coding. And I'm going to assign this to a different cost center and a different project in my case. Like this. And then you can see that we have if I add the third final row here, that we have $1,000 left to code against a account. So I'm going to say 500 here just to show you what can happen if you short code it, if you like. So this is validated against the net amount of the invoice. So this is now telling me that the invoice, the coding that you assigned does not balance because you're short 500. So I can correct that by assigning $1,000 here. Now I have coded this invoice, which means it's ready for final approval or payment. If approvals are required, there are several options to choose from. You can, for example, use a hierarchy, which means you have an approval chain with several users based on their individual spending limits or their assignment to specific accounts or codes. They will receive the invoice and have the ability to approve it and move it forward to the next step. In this case here, you can see that Rick is the final approver. So depending on different settings or routing rules here, for example, dollar amount and spending limits, the invoice will be first approved by perhaps all three of these or just Jim, and then it will go to Rick as he is the final approver. This is based on spending limits, which is triggered on the total amount. Another option would be to have the accounts payable clerk manually select users from a drop-down list where they can sort of ad hoc add a user for approval here. So if the user here in the case accounts payable clerk knows that the A1 lightning supply belongs to Jennifer, you can pick that user and send the invoice to Jennifer or that person for approval. Then based on Jennifer's individual settings, the invoice might be approved, or if it exceeds her spending limits, it might go to her manager or next person in line for the approval. Let's have a look at another example where the end user have the ability to train ReadSoft Online on what to capture, what fields to extract, and what line item columns to extract. So in this case here, we have two validation errors or questions, one on the invoice number, and then there's something on line number 3. So the invoice number is a duplicate similar to my previous example, so I'm just going to overwrite that. But you can see how it now moves to the part of the screen where this focus of the next error is. And we can see that there's a discrepancy on the quantity, which means the two-way match did not work out. And I can look here, I can see that the quantity is 10, the unit price is 23.18, and the extended amount is 0, which does not work out either because we're doing the amount validation here where we take the quantity times the unit price to equal the extended amount. So something is wrong. So by simply looking at the invoice, I can see that the ordered quantity column has been extracted in front of the shipped quantity. So now I'm going to use machine learning to teach ReadSoft Online on how to extract and read line items on this supplier. So I'm going to remove these lines. This is a task you will only have to perform one time, if ever, on a supplier. But I'm going to use a step-by-step guide here, which is asking me what columns does appear on this supplier invoice. They do not appear to have the PO line number, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, they do have a part number. So I'm going to do a box around that in the first row. It moves on and asks me now, does this supplier give you purchase order numbers on line level? No. We do have a description, however. And now we move on to the quantity. In this case, I'm going to pick the shipped quantity in front of the ordered quantity. Move on to my unit of measure, the unit price, and the extended amount. See, now I mapped out the line item extraction structure for this supplier. And what I get in return are extracted data correctly, which means the shipped quantity is now extracted. The two-way match worked out, and the amount validation, 0 times 23 equals 0, worked out. This invoice is now ready for either GL account coding or approval, or basically to be sent to the next coming system, the ERP system. So by clicking this OK button, either a workflow can trigger for coding, or a workflow can trigger for approval, or the invoice along with the invoice image can be sent to the ERP system for final approval and payment. On top of your ReadSoft Online solution sits the analytics dashboard that will give you an insight to how your system is performing, how your users are performing, suppliers and volumes and such. You can see there's a workload dashboard that will give you information about the load itself. You have a volume section that will tell you who is your biggest supplier, which day of the month did you receive more invoices than the other. Under the performance tab, you can see, for example, how your operators are performing, how much time they're spending in the solution. You can change the chart type here, for example, to something to your likings. You can uncheck certain users to only focus on the users of interest. You can also see that there's an extraction and performance metric here that will show you how ReadSoft Online is performing on your supplier. This will tell you how the identification is measured, meaning how many times have you correctly identified this supplier against the vendor master, in this case 100% of the time. If you go further down, you can see the individual fields and how they're extracted on that specific supplier. And on this supplier, we have an average of 95.24% of accuracy. This includes true positives, false negatives, and so forth. If a field was found by the machine itself, if it was altered by the user, or if it was completed and extracted to all 100% completeness. This is a tool that you can use access in your web browser. You will assign a user credential to any of your business users. This concludes the session on Kofax ReadSoft Online invoice processing in the cloud.